Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Mary Did You Know and Bible Translations Part 2. So in Part 1, we looked at the song Mary Did You Know, the Hebrew version of it, and then we translated that into English so that way you could sing along to the Hebrew if you wanted to. In this part, though, we are going to look at how this song can teach us something about Bible translations and how Bible translations work. So without further ado, let's begin. So the first thing you need to know is that Bible translations are on a spectrum. So one side of the spectrum you could say is a formal equivalence, which could also mean a word-for-word translation. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have something called dynamic equivalence, which can be called a thought-for-thought translation or also a functional equivalence because it's communicating the meaning or the function of the sentence or the words behind it. So an example of word-for-word would be using the word seed in Hebrew, the word zera. Now, this word can be used to refer to actual seed that you plant in the ground for crops, or it can also be used for offspring or descendants. So you may have heard like the seed of Abraham, referring to the descendants or offspring of Abraham. So in a word-for-word translation, they would most likely use the word seed and try to consistently, wherever the word zera appears, will consistently try to translate it as the word seed, unless in a specific context, maybe they're just not able to because it just won't work for that meaning in trying to understand that sentence for whatever reason. That's just an example. Now, a thought-for-thought translation won't translate it as seed, or, well, sometimes it may translate as seed if it's referring to crops or planting things. But if it's referring to like humans or people, like descendants or offspring, they will probably translate as descendant or offspring. Another example is the word for son, ben. So in Hebrew, the word for son is ben. And this word can be translated as the word son, or it can also refer to a person's descendants as well. So, for example, the phrase, the sons of Israel, it would be B'nai Yisrael, B'nai Yisrael. And that phrase will show up a lot, especially in Exodus, where God is giving the instructions to Moses to tell Israel, especially around like the Ten Commandments or the laws and stuff. He will say, tell the sons of Israel, XYZ. And that phrase, the sons of Israel, can be translated as sons of Israel, but it can also be translated as the descendants of Israel or the children of Israel. So in a thought-for-thought translation, it may commonly be translated as the children of Israel, because he's not just speaking only to the males, the sons, when he's talking to them about the laws regarding the Sabbath or other dietary restrictions, or the laws, when he's talking to them, it's for both men and women and children and all that. So it would be makes more sense to say the children of Israel and to communicate that. But in a word-for-word translation, they will say sons of Israel because they're trying to keep that consistency of translating that word ben as son every time, so you know when the word appears. But for the thought-for-thought, they're trying to capture the thought or the meaning of the word. In this meaning, it means children. In another meaning or sense, in another context, it could mean sons. So depending on the context, for a thought-for-thought translation, it will change the meaning because they want you to understand the thought, not just the word. In word-for-word, they try to keep it consistent by saying the same word over and over again. So each of them have two different purposes in what they're trying to communicate to their audience. Okay, so now let's take a look at the song and see an example. So over here, I translate it as word for word as possible, and it will sound absolutely weird. So in the song, if you've watched the previous video, you'll know how I broke it down. But the translation of this part would be, Mary, did you know that will come the day and your son will walk on water? Mary, did you know that the son of yours will restore light of eyes? It sounds absolutely weird in English. It doesn't make sense. But you can still get the idea. You understand that her son, Jesus, will walk on water. You'll understand that he's going to restore light of eyes, which you can probably guess that means someone who is blind, he's going to restore their sight. You can guess that and you'll understand it. But it sounds weird in English. So something that would communicate the thought behind it would be a thought-for-thought translation, which could be translated like this. Mary, did you know that a day will come when your son will walk on water? Mary, did you know that your son will restore the sight of the blind? And so that's an example of two different ways. So the first part, when it says light of eyes, it kind of brings you back to the idea of Genesis 1, where God was the one who created light. So he's the only one who can restore the light of eyes. So when you read it that way, in the word for word sense, it gives a hint of this idea of going all the way back to Genesis. In the thought for thought, it's communicating the meaning, the sight of the blind. You understand that it means that. But it may lose that idea of Genesis 1 kind of idea when you see it, because you don't think of light of eyes. So that's how and it's not wrong. It's just they're communicating two different things, which is why it's important when you read Bible translations. This is just a song. So if it can have this much meaning in a song, how much more meaning in a Bible translation? Which is why you should read more than one Bible translation to get the full meaning of the text. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. So this is, Mary, did you know? The blind ones see, the lame ones walk, the deaf ones hear his voice, the dead ones rise, and the mute ones praise his name. And that feels very wooden. So that's usually what happens with word for word translations. They can seem wooden or stiff. A thought for thought translation can seem a bit more fluid or flowing kind of thing, because you're trying to write it in English. So it could be translated as, Mary, did you know the blind will see, the lame will walk, the deaf ones will, not deaf ones. I'm still going for the word for word. It's the deaf will hear his voice, the dead will be raised, and the mute will praise his name. Okay, let's look at another one. This one is, Mary, did you know that the son of yours, he is Lord of all the creation? Mary, did you know that when the day comes, every knee will kneel in his name? It could also be translated as, Mary, did you know your son is Lord over all creation? Mary, did you know that a day will come when every knee will bow to his name? So you can get the idea that usually word for word, you try to consistently translate a word, whereas in thought for thought, you usually try to communicate the meaning behind the words. So now let's take a look at some different Bible translations. So let's draw a line here, and then on one side we'll write FE, and on the other side we'll write DE. So FE stands for formal equivalence, which is word for word, and DE stands for dynamic equivalence, which is thought for thought, or you could say functional equivalence, because it's communicating the meaning. So let's take a look at the first kind of formal equivalence, and that is interlinear. Interlinear Bibles will be absolutely word for word or as literal as they can be, and it will sound absolutely horrendous in English, because they're not trying to be true to English. They're trying to be true to the text and try and communicate the words exactly how they are. But it's also not perfect, because you will not understand it, and some words cannot be translated one for one from the Hebrew into English. Some words don't have an exact English equivalent. So even interlinear translations are not perfect. But that's what they try to do. They try to communicate directly under each of the words the English word. So you'll have the Hebrew or Greek on top, depending on what you're reading. Say if you're reading the Old Testament, it would be the Hebrew. If it's the New Testament, it would be the Greek. And if you're reading the Septuagint, it would probably be Greek. Well, not probably. It would definitely be Greek. I would hope it was Greek and not something else they put there. So you would have the Hebrew or Greek on top, and you'd have the English right under each of the words. So you can see the approximate equivalent of that Hebrew word in English. Okay, next translation would be the NASB, the LSB, the NRSV, the ESV, the KJV, the NKJV, the CSB, the NAB, the NIV, the NET or NET, and the NLT. And you can see how they're going across the spectrum from being word for word all the way to dynamic equivalent. And all of them have a specific way of communicating to the audience. So word for words usually try to consistently, as I mentioned earlier, like the word Zara, they try to show that word consistently throughout the text. Whereas the thought for thought will capture the meaning behind the text. So each of them have a specific purpose in what they're trying to do to communicate to their audience, which is important to keep in mind, because many times you may hear people like putting Bible translations or pitting them against each other when they shouldn't be doing that, because they have different purposes in translating and they're trying to communicate different things to the audience of what the original text said, the original Hebrew and Greek. And they have different functions of communicating. Now, the other thing you should know is there's another sort of group, which would be a paraphrase. Examples of this would be the CEV or the Message. These are paraphrase translations. So they're not exactly thought for thought, where it's just capturing the meaning. It's trying to paraphrase something in today's sort of language of the way we sort of speak today, and try to communicate things using ways we speak today. So it's not exactly that great to read the Message, but maybe the CEV you could read, or other paraphrases could help you out when something's too word for word and you can't understand it. Maybe a paraphrase could help you out. And these are the different spectrums. They're all serving different purposes. Now, another thing is that you could have a Bible translation that is neither formal equivalence, dynamic equivalence, or even a paraphrase. Example of this would be CJB, because it may be using all the different methods in translating to communicate meaning. So some Bible translations will do that. This is just one example. There are probably many others. And they may use a combination of these different methods to translate to their audience. And that makes sense, because the CJB is usually trying to communicate a Jewish perspective, which can help you understand the Bible a bit more, because the Bible was written to Jews, so it makes sense to understand the Jewish perspective on certain things. And that's what the CJB is usually trying to communicate. And so it can help out. And as I said, none of these translations are perfect, not even the CJB. So all of them have different methods of communicating, and none of them are perfect, which is why you should read a whole bunch of different ones to help understand that meaning and see what the translators are communicating to you. The other thing you should know is that there are grade levels or reading levels for these translations. For example, the NIV is around 7th to 8th grade level of reading, the NLT around 6th grade. The ESV is around 10th to 12th grade. And the KJV is good luck if you don't speak like Shakespeare, is what I will say. I don't know what grade level that is, because no one speaks like that today. So each of them serve different purposes, and they're at different grade levels. So it can help you out when you're reading. Now, it doesn't mean that, hey, I graduated from high school, therefore that means I should be reading the ESV or something higher than the ESV, and I don't have to read the NLT or the NIV. That is not a very good idea, because when you're reading the ESV or LSB or NASB, it will be word for word. And remember, word for word and thought for thought are two different things. They're two different ways of communicating. So rather than saying just based on grade level, you should think of it also based on the function of the translation and the purpose that the translators had in mind when communicating. So you should read more than one translation. Read the NIV, read the ESV too, because both of them can help you understand the text better. But especially when you're trying to pick out a translation for a child, it probably would be good to look at the grade levels, because I don't think you want to give an ESV to maybe a 7-year-old. They probably won't understand everything in there. So maybe giving an NLT would be a better choice. So usually when it's referring to kids, you probably do want to look at the grade levels. But usually adults, you if you've graduated high school and you probably also graduated college or university, you probably should be reading more than one translation. Unlike kids, they're not at that level yet to read more than one, but you are. Okay, so another thing you should know is that there is a red zone in translations, which means there's a red zone of certain translations you should avoid and not use because they're not good. An example of this would be the Joseph Smith translation or the New World Translation. Joseph Smith translation was created by Joseph Smith, the leader of the LDS, which is Latter-day Saints, or also known as Mormons. So he created a translation, and in Genesis 50, near the end, he adds to it a prophecy about himself and puts his name in it conveniently. And so that's the reason why you shouldn't read his translations, because if he changed that part in Genesis, there's who knows what else he's changed in the Bible, because that part which he added in Genesis 50 does not exist in the Septuagint, any of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or even the Masoretic text. It doesn't exist in the original languages. So he's adding to the text to give himself adding to the text to give himself authority and prop himself up. Now, the other example is the New World Translation, which is by Jehovah's Witnesses. And they also changed the text a lot. An example would be John 1:1. In John 1:1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But in the New World Translation, they translate it as, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God," meaning Jesus is a God separate from the Father, which sounds absolutely weird. Because at that point, then you're going to say you believe in two gods, but they say still they believe in one God, but somehow they translate it as a God, because they're trying to put the divinity of Jesus down and diminish it. They don't believe Jesus is Jehovah, or you would say Yahweh. They don't believe he's God. So that's why they change or alter the text a lot to fit their theology, which is dangerous. You should never translate something in a way to fit your own theology. You should translate it as the text is and communicate the original meaning, not try to make something fit your theology. And another group which is becoming popular is the Mirror Bible and the Passion Translation. Now, there are a lot of things wrong with these translations, and there have been other people who have done a better job of explaining all those things. Example, that would be Melissa Dougherty and Mike Winger. Mike Winger, for the Passion Translation, he's done interviews with scholars and stuff and created an entire playlist on his channel with all these interviews from different scholars and different people of explaining why the Passion Translation should not be used, and it is not a good translation. And I will link his playlist in the description. And Melissa Dougherty also does a good job explaining why the Mirror Bible is not a good Bible, and it's basically trying to make you feel like you're God. and it's kind of like a deifying of the self. So don't read the Mirror Bible. Do not read the Passion Translation. I will link both of their videos and the playlist for Mike Winger as well in this description if you want to find out more about why you should not read these translations. Okay, so that's it for this video. And in the next video, we will take a look at examples of the translations, the good translations, not the red zone, the good translations in the green zone. That we will take a look at them and see how we can use these translations to understand the biblical text better if we don't know anything about the original languages. So we can use multiple translations to understand the original text better, even if we don't know how to read the original languages yet. And I will be showing you how to do that in the third video. Okay, so until then, shalom and God bless.